Hi, everyone. My name is Bri Chesler. Welcome to my SAXE Emerging Artist presentation. I'm an interdisciplinary artist focusing on sculptural installation and design. I'm currently living and working in Seattle, Washington, where I work as a glassblower, designer, and artist. My story doesn't start in Seattle. I actually grew up on the other side of the country in a place called Jupiter Farms, Florida. As you can see, the area is really rural, overgrown swampland, very Jurassic Parky. Uh, Living here is what really developed my affinity for forms found in nature and the carnality of desire. I found refuge within this wild landscape. And on quite the opposite side of the spectrum, I was also still living in South Florida, where sex sells and beauty is totally focused on the body. And so these were the two dynamics I was dealing with. Being faced with these two really different perspectives and definitions of beauty made me curious about what similarities I could find between these two juxtaposing worlds. And this really built the conceptual foundation for my current work, drawing from the wild and erotic character of the natural environment while focusing on concepts of beauty and desire. By combining forms found in botany and biology, I try and create sculptures that almost flirt with the audience, which you'll see examples of later in my presentation. As much of an impression as Florida left on me, I never felt like it was home. And I did everything in my power to get out of there when I was 18. I received a scholarship to the Kansas City Art Institute, where I ended up doing my undergraduate studies in the sculpture department. And I was really drawn to this program because of their focus on foundry and metal fabrication. But I was always known for my material exploration. I wasn't actually introduced to glass until much later on in my academic career. I was always making molds in the basement of the ceramics department, which I totally shouldn't have been in. I wasn't a ceramics major. And so, of course, one of the professors, George Timmock, took notice of me. And instead of kicking me out, he became interested in what I was doing and what I wanted to achieve. And after talking to me, he invited me into his class, which was a glass fusing elective. And George really let me run wild. He gave me full access to the material and the studio. And this is really where I started learning about what glass could do. This was the first glass piece I ever made. And I ended up taking this elective multiple times. And eventually George took me aside and told me about a place called Pilchuck Glass School, kind of adding a jab in at the end that I shouldn't even bother applying because only really talented glass artists get in there, knowing fully well that I could not deny a challenge. And so I ended up applying and went that summer, taking my first hot glass class with Matt Escooky, which was a flame working class. And it was a glimpse into working with this molten media and the community that surrounded it that I hadn't really had yet. And I wasn't necessarily satisfied with my material relationship as an artist when I was in school with metal. I found it really abrasive in comparison to the type of organic work I was making, but glass was so sensual and intimate, it really made sense to me. So after that summer, I went back to school, finished out my undergraduate studies, not having any access to hot glass, but continuing my exploration in fusing. And this is what came out of that. It's installation that I did in collaboration with another student, Chelsea Lynn, and it highlighted the patterning that I was using in my glass work at the time. So after graduating, I ended up moving back to Florida to help take care of my mom. And it wasn't in my plan. You know, I had a lot of dreams and ideas of what I was going to do after I graduate, but that just wasn't reality. And so I was still making work. It was really weird and grotesque and not glass at all. But there was something I really enjoyed about it. And I missed the entrancing quality of glass. I really felt like that was lacking in my work. And I wanted to figure out a way to combine my aesthetic in my glass work with this more grotesque kind of sculptural work I had started focusing on. This was another piece from that time. And so I was struggling working 3 jobs, 80 plus hours a week. And I had a boss who would always say to me, if you want to make glass, what are you doing here? Which I always took as an insult. And eventually, instead of taking it as an insult, I decided to take it as a piece of advice. And I applied to Pilchuck. A few weeks later, before I found out whether I had been accepted, I ended up getting in a really bad car accident. And as I was recovering, I was going through my email and found my acceptance letter to Pilchuck telling me I received a scholarship to a hot shop class that summer. I was overjoyed and totally devastated at the same time, not knowing if I could attend because I had gotten some pretty serious back injuries during the accident. I knew I needed to go. I just had a feeling that it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and I wouldn't have been able to go without the scholarship. And so I just decided I was going to be smart about what I could really be capable of with my injuries in the hot shop. And I had an amazing instructor that summer, Nico Dimitrovic, and an equally amazing class to learn alongside of. And as the class progressed, I realized that I really needed to be a part of this community of Washington, and that I really needed to dedicate myself to this medium, that I couldn't wait anymore. So I returned to Florida. I got my mom settled and I moved out to Seattle a few months later. I'm incredibly grateful for all the people that supported me that I met that summer, who allowed me to stay in their homes, crash on their couches as I navigated my way into this crazy glass world. And so after about 6 months of working other jobs, I ended up getting offered a job at a production glass studio kind of by chance. The girl I was living with at the time had been offered the job and couldn't take it. And so I was told if I show up before 11 a.m., I would have the job. Showed up, got the job, and ended up being a hot shop setup assistant. So I cut sheet glass, prepped Marini, and assisted glass blowers really with whatever they needed. And working in production was really my glass education. I started working at the very bottom, worked my way up to a production designer for products, and then ended up talking my way onto the floor. So when I became a product designer, I negotiated as part of my deal for letting the studio use my designs, that I wanted hot shop time after hours so that I could really focus on the material and learn, work on my hand skills, and become more of an asset to the company. And so they agreed, and I ended up staying after work every day, literally every day. The owners used to joke that I should just get an RV and park it up in the parking lot and live there because of how much I was at work. And I don't work at that production studio anymore. I actually got offered a job last year, which I'm really excited about, with Artful Ashes, which is a different production company where we make memorials for people. And I find that really rewarding. And so it's nice to be able to kind of balance out working in a production hot shop and making something meaningful for people. Throughout all this, I met my two best friends, Jessie and Minhee England. I didn't know it at the time, but these two people were going to become a huge force of support and creativity in my life. And Minhee and I ended up starting a business together called Liquid Lush to help us both bring in income as a way to finance and support our own studio projects. And having a business really taught me a lot about being an artist, working with customers, and how to work with someone else, how to sustain myself. For Minhee and I to have a cohesive brand, we both needed to create a visual language that we could easily replicate within our varied skill sets. And so we're always designing with the other person in mind. And I think that's really interesting. Liquid Lush also allows me to keep my hands busy and my ideas flowing when I'm not necessarily feeling the most motivated in my own studio. And I find that really nice as well. The one thing I never did through all of this was stop applying to things. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I really struggled. I got a lot of rejections, and a lot of people looked at me like I was crazy because I was investing all of my time and energy into making this work that I wasn't showing anywhere. But I kept going because I knew that I needed to push myself and keep learning and just have a reason to stay motivated. And so I challenged myself to building a portfolio solely for applying to different opportunities so that I could feel like I had a better chance. And so these are some of the pieces that I created. And I want to go back and bring up those more grotesque sculptures I brought in the beginning and remind you about how I said I wanted to combine that with my glass. So this is where that started to happen, and stuff started to get really weird, and I liked it. Bitch, or being in total control of him or her, was in response to some things I was going through in 2017. And it was when the women's marches were really in full effect. And I was the only female working at the production glass studio I was at the time. And it was just kind of my reaction to the experience I was having as a woman, with my sexuality and gender kind of impeding on my success. And I decided to reclaim a slur commonly used towards women as the title, and make it into something that was strong, taking the literal definition of bitch, female dog, and combining it with piece of the female anatomy as a play on words, while actually also commenting on the stereotype of women in authority positions. Crux is about the disintegration of our own desires, and its eroded surface is kind of a visual interpretation of that journey to rock bottom. And it is totally balanced on the toe, which emphasizes the fragility of the piece, but also the gravity of something being weighed down just ever so gently on this one point about to fall over. Weight, this piece is about being a voyeur to a loved one's death and the vulnerability and fragility of life, the kind of everlasting residue that love can have on someone. And it has an active rust patina, which means it still corrodes and eats away at the surface at the same time. This is Succulence, and it's about the botany of desire and the natural impulse to reproduce. So this sculpture is also balanced on a single point on the nipple of a breast, and its whimsical nature is kind of flirtatious and comical, mimicking a lot of the feelings we all have when we become sexually self-aware. I really like this piece. Prick. This is inspired by a kind of love and desire that can consume and drain an individual. The form is loosely based on a tick, and as the viewer approaches it and gets closer, the more their own image is engulfed and warped within the reflective surface. So these were all kind of smaller experiments where I was trying to figure out how I really wanted to combine all these different materials I was working with. You know, I was still trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to get out of this process and aesthetic, and how to translate my ideas to my audience while still highlighting my use of glass. In 2018, so after about 3 years of blowing glass consistently at the production studio, I saw a call for a glass-focused show at the Bellevue Arts Museum. And I applied fully expecting not to get it because I knew of all the talent and competition, specifically in the Pacific Northwest. So I went all out on my application. I was just kind of like, well, I'm going to do it. What do I got to lose? Probably not going to get it anyway. And to my surprise, they accepted my proposal, and I was so excited and completely terrified because I had never made work on this scale, never made work for a museum, and I was still learning about glass. I didn't really know how to fabricate any of this. And so it was a lot to take on. I knew that the whole glass community in Washington, maybe even in all of the Pacific Northwest, was going to see my work up close and personal. And that was a lot of pressure for me. That was a lot of people that I wanted to impress. And so I knew that this was really the moment for me to show what I had brewing inside of me over all the years while I was learning. And I was so nervous to show the glass community my mixed media methods because I didn't want them to see it as a distasteful sentiment to the history of this material. And I needed to stay true to myself and what I envisioned for this piece. And I ended up getting great feedback from the community and the public. And it really fueled me to keep exploring these methods and aesthetic and making work in this way. And a lot of the way I use scrap material in my work developed as I made this installation. I funded the creation of this solely myself. And so I had to be smart and thrifty about where to get the material. And as I was working in production, I saw all this stuff just go to waste because it was not good enough quality for the studio to use. And so I started collecting it. And over time, I realized how much this was in line with the conceptual foundations of my work, focusing on excess and desire. And I was taking what was undesired by someone and giving it this new identity and even elevating it and putting it in a museum as a piece of fine art. And I thought that was really an interesting dialogue for me as the maker to kind of have with my work. And this work is pretty big. It's uh, 8 feet wide by 10 feet tall. So it is a large scale installation. And so making this piece, I was trying to date a lot at the time, and it was kind of my first real dive into dating since college. And so I was really inspired by my experiences of sex culture that I hadn't really been awakened to yet. And it was exploring the more negative aspects of sexual obsession and desire, focusing on concepts of the feminine while juxtaposing luxury with affliction. And I attempted to create an installation that kind of drew the audience in, and the closer they looked, it revealed these little erotic forms and elements on closer examination. And the piece is about challenging the feminine identity and confronting the viewer with this more grotesque nature of desire. It's meant to have almost an infectious quality to its aesthetic, virally growing from the architecture. And so, as this show at the Bellevue Arts Museum came to a close, I got more exciting news that I had been accepted as an emerging artist-in-residence at Pilchuck Glass School. And I could finally focus on glass with all of my energy and explore ways of making that I didn't necessarily have access to at home. And so this opportunity really changed my life and changed the work I was making. I think it just really allowed me to develop on some ideas that I hadn't had the time to. I highly recommend it to anyone considering applying. And the group of people I met while I was at this residency are amazing, incredibly talented, very willing to share ideas and techniques. And it was definitely a special group of people that will stick with me forever. So this residency allowed me to start a series of work that I have slowly been finishing since I've left. And it's a deeper exploration into the aesthetic and concepts that I was focused on in Fun, Flirty, and Festering. But I wanted to push it farther, focusing more on the relationship between the 2D and 3D in a way that activated pattern and form. I spent a lot of time in the hot shop before my residency because I knew that was the one studio I wouldn't really have access to while I was there. And so I brought a lot of blanks with me, knowing that I wanted to work in the cold shop and carve, experimenting with manipulating the blown forms outside of the hot shop. So this is some of the pieces I was working on while I was there. And I did a lot of different things. And you can see it's all kind of bits and pieces, nothing's really fully completed. And that was my plan. I wanted to go in and just kind of create this foundation of the series for me to continue working on once I left. The summer before this residency, I had taken a class at Pilchuck with Sarah Gilbert and Yara Sarah, learning the basics of engraving. And so that's really what I was trying to expand on with the cold working processes while I was there. And this experience taught me so much. It taught me so much about myself and my work, and I felt like I was floundering a little bit before I went. And by the time I walked away, I was filled with this new confidence in myself and my work that is so valuable to have as an artist. And at the same time, Laura Donifer reached out to me on social media. I had never met her at the time. She started to support me and send me images for inspiration and give me guidance in art and life, anything really. And it was amazing to have someone reach out to me and reassure me that I was growing in the right direction. And we continued to develop a friendship, which we still have today. She still mentors me. And I'm bringing it up because I found out later that she discovered my work through this residency. So never doubt how sending in one application or saying yes to one opportunity can change your life in numerous ways. Not only did I walk away with a new understanding of my own work and the direction I wanted to go in, but I came out with lifelong friends, totally new knowledge base, and a whole new series to work on. So it's really valuable just to put yourself out there. Bruised Brute was the first piece I completed after my residency. And it's about trying to love someone who's too wounded to love back. The piece is visually inspired by bruised fruit or viscera from the body. And the process of making these forms is actually really abrasive and erosive, almost as if I am bruising or wounding the surface of the glass, leaving visual lacerations and kind of mimicking that conceptual inspiration behind the work itself. This piece is currently available at Habitat Galleries. And 2020 was a weird one. First of all, I slowed down after finishing this piece and let myself process a lot of things, art related or not. And I had been incredibly fortunate to receive the Chihuly Gardens and Glass Scholarship to help fund my studio practice and finish the series that I had started at Pilchuck during my residency. So that's how I've been able to continue my work through pandemic. But I did have a lot of opportunities put on hold. I still made things consistently, but they were all kind of bits and pieces, and I was just slowly developing my work. I wasn't really finishing anything. I was doing a lot of applying and researching. And it ended up paying off, which brings me to what's happening now. In 2020, I was also lucky enough to receive the Hauberg Fellowship at Pilchuck Glass School with Katie Hancock, Sarah Terry, Minhee England, and Julia Chamberlain. Some of these ladies I knew before we applied together, and some of them I actually met through the application process. And we're a really dynamic group. And it's been really interesting collaborating and working together thus far. And if you don't know what the Hauberg Fellowship is, it is focused around collaboration. And so that is why we applied. We will be attending the residency this summer at Pilchuck Glass School, which I'm very excited about. And we recently got an opportunity with Pilchuck Gallery in downtown Seattle to have an exhibition. So we decided to have 2 back-to-back exhibitions. Our current exhibition, Voices in Glass, is highlighting each of us as individuals, and it's been curated in conjunction with the secondary show, which will feature our collaborative installation. So in the current show, Voices in Glass, this is the piece that I have in. It's titled Squirm, and the imagery is inspired by a rotten peach. 2 fleshy halves kind of encase this wormy center. Squirm investigates the switch in perspective when something sweet goes sour, when attraction turns into repugnance. The title Squirm is a play on words. It sounds like worm, giving insight into what these central forms kind of represent, while at the same time making you think of the physical action of squirming, which can be a reaction to both pleasure and distaste. So like the concept and imagery, the title encapsulates the feeling of being entwined by lust and loathing, and the realization that what you have once desired has been tainted. So it hangs at head height so that the worm-like forms are kind of exploding towards the audience at head height. And the 2 fleshy halves are raised so that the center is recessed a little bit, making you feel just ever so slightly sucked in. What's happening in the future? Well, I'm very excited to say that I'm looking forward to teaching at Pilchuck in the summer of 2022. It's so incredibly flattering, and I feel honored, really, to have been invited to a place that has had such a deep impression on my own development as an artist. And I'm really excited to give back and give some creative energy and inspiration to whoever I can while I'm there. And I can't wait to see what the creative minds of 2022 do that summer. And I'm also in the process of developing a fully immersive installation with Minhee England that will be featured at Method Gallery in 2023. This idea we have had literally since we met. It's how our friendship developed. So I know we're both ecstatic to finally have the opportunity to bring it into fruition and work on it together. So please keep your eyes out. It'll be titled Delectable. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has listened and looked at my work, and feel free to reach out by email or social media. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have for me. Thank you so much to everyone who has helped me on my way. It's been incredible, and I'm excited to show everyone what I'm gonna make this year. Bye.